The question is, do you agree that Scotland should be an independent country?
For me, the principle that we work best when we work together.
Well, they didn't.
Very serious.
The referendum. It seems to me that they're not dealing with the issues.
Hello, this is episode number 45 of the Scottish Independence podcast, and this week the guest is Derek Bateman, who you may have heard of on, well, most of the Scottish broadcast media, and his blog's been lighting up the independence debate recently, so I'll just go straight to the conversation and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Derek, how's it going?
Well, I'm a little bit hungover, if truth be told. I was out having a drink with David Pratt of the Herald last night, who's off to Nairobi this morning. In fact, he'll be gone. I hope he's in better condition than I am on that flight. But otherwise, I'm fine, and I'm enjoying the debate. And from a personal point of view, I'm getting a lot from it. And I'm also increasingly involved in different projects. I mean, this is an independence project. And I spent a day yesterday in meetings with different people with some, what I think are quite exciting prospects for the next 9 months.
For example?
Well, I can't really give you details of it because there's a kind of commercial interest in one of them. But I think, the territory that you are currently in here, Michael, this idea that, we're kind of dependent on mainstream broadcasters is beginning to get a bit tiring. I think we've already got the alternative view emerging, fully on the internet now and challenging the kind of the conventional media. When it's required, but it hasn't really happened in broadcasting terms. That's a bit more tricky, as you know, to put together. So there's a possibility that something may emerge in the near future along those lines, I hope.
Do you think the mainstream media are still a bit behind the times? I mean, I've spent a bit of time in media monitoring groups in universities where I used to work, but that was more to do with fairness and coverage surrounding Iraq war and research, Palestine, Israel, those kind of issues. But do you think with the kind of explosion in social media, the mainstream are lagging behind?
I'm not sure that's to some degree. I mean, I think what happened with quite a lot of the media, the newspapers, they were caught out by that, some years ago when it really took off. And I think the only paper that was up to speed very quickly and got ahead of the curve was The Guardian. But they've been caught up as well. The Times now its subscription service is massive. They proved that the paywall works. People will pay for quality, for journalism. I think the Scottish media kind of missed the boat a bit, and I've struggled a bit. But it is there, and you can communicate with them if you have like the direct contact between reader and consumer and journalist and paper. I think that works really well. And they're in it, definitely. They're now, it's now kind of part of what they do. I think what the difference is really, it's the tone of what is delivered. I mean, there is in all of the mainstream media a safeness, and a lot of this is to do with the people who run it because they're money men. I mean, people like the Herald, a respectable Scottish product, but, owned by Gannett in the States. I mean, that ownership does filter through the kind of mentality that they have. You've got to remember that unlike the guys that, like myself, blogging out there on the internet, the newspapers have got to comply with regulation. They've also got to please advertisers. There are limits to where they can go in what they say. And I think that comes through when we've got something as radical as the independence movement. I think the kind of media mindset, the orthodoxy, is now being challenged. I mean, perhaps not enough. I mean, there are some very, very good journalists out there in the mainstream as well. But I think sometimes that this debate sits uneasily with a lot of the mainstream media. And another interesting thing for me is having been a professional journalist all my life, there is a resentment and a jealousy, I think, amongst the profession about people out there, the citizen journalists and all that. And I mean, they're right to regard themselves as the pros. I think that's fair. But there is also a place for everybody now that the media allows us, the technology allows us to do it. It's a place for all of us to have our say. And I think some of the guys in the mainstream papers shouldn't be quite so resentful and dismissive. I saw Newsnet, for example, which we all look at, and so do all the professional journalists, being written off in the Daily Record as some kind of nutcase or crackpot nationalist site. That is just insulting. And I would think from the Newsnet point of view, to be sneered at by a paper like The Record, they will find deeply ironic.
But I understand that there are professional journalists that take their jobs very seriously, but then in the Scottish context, it's all very strange. You could think, for example, of the absolute pig's ear the media made of the Rangers story. I mean, that doesn't scream professionalism to me when there's taking, although he's written some more controversial things recently, but it's taking people like Alex Thompson at Channel 4 and people from outside the Scottish media environment to come in and shake the thing up a little bit.
Well, to a degree, that's true. But I mean, at the same time, if you look at the BBC, for example, the BBC's investigative unit, a television unit, I mean, they broke the story. I mean, and, you've got there, they did such a good job. You have reporters in there being threatened, but by Rangers nutters, who you're not able to talk about certain events at Ibrox because some of them are just so extreme. So, I mean, that's the BBC's mainstream media. And I mean, they were ahead of the curve on that. And if you listen, as I do, one of my favourite programmes is the Football Talking on a Saturday afternoon with Kenny McIntyre, used to be a gym trainer. And on that programme, you get guys like Tom English, who has followed this in detail. You get Graham Spears, another top quality British football writer. And they dissect these things and give really intelligent opinions on them as well. So although, aspects of the media may have been behind, I think that certainly the stuff I've got from the BBC has been on top of that story.
Just to contradict you a little, I think that a lot of the fans were screaming and certain sites and tweeters were reporting a lot of what happened on the BBC stuff 2-3 years before. And then it came out onto the BBC later, who did a good job. Yeah. But
well, I think the point is with television, I mean, you are dealing much more. It's like a kind of ocean liner turning idea. It takes a while to put that together. It's not a big team. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but, they have to kind of prioritize certain stories. They would be in the middle of doing other work when that story came up. And the other point to bear in mind is to do an investigation properly is really time consuming. It's legalistic. Everything has to be covered. And I know the guys who made that program and how difficult it was. And you're talking about getting access to, I shouldn't really say this, but people who are in positions of authority who shouldn't really be speaking to the media at all. And you have to have all of that cleared, know it's legal and it meets all the requirements of the broadcasting rules and the BBC's producer guidelines. It's a lot trickier, I think, than just watching the screen makes it seem. There's a lot going on behind the scenes there to get that onto the screen. Anyway, let's not get stuck on Rangers. I mean, I'm from Glasgow and I live near Fair Hill, so that would be closer to my kind of team rather than Celtic or Rangers.
But to move it round towards the independence debate, because one of the things, I mean, you said there's been some surprising things in this debate. One of them for me was that I just discovered Orangemen for Indy, which is a group which has taken me surprised, but that's a bit more towards Rangers.
Well, I'm going to think about aging hippies for independence as well.
But
we're going to have free love after a yes vote for those of us who can still manage it.
But one of the things that kind of surprises me in this debate is that none of them have gone, pro-Indy. I mean, you could look at a lot of them and say that some of the newspapers are more or less vociferously pro-union, with a couple of things in the opinion pieces that might go the other way. But why do you think that they seem scared to take the ball? I mean, it's also a chance for them. If Scotland was to become an independent nation, Edinburgh could become a news centre instead of a news outpost. Like you've got any major capital city in Europe becomes more of a news centre. Why do you think nobody wants to sort of pick up and go with that opportunity that it would give them as well?
Well, I suppose that's mindset. I mean, you have to remember that they are playing at the moment to an audience that they know, albeit declining. And one answer to your question is, why would you jeopardize the readership you currently have? That's a gamble for an editor to take. I mean, it's all very well for us to say, well, if you support independence, a lot of independent supporters. But, all the evidence is that we are the minority. And the combination of the knows and the don't knows, the people who are probably buying the papers, I mean, that is the market. That's the majority market. And an editor, even one who really wanted and may personally support independence, has a dilemma. You've got to get it past the board. They have somebody like a managing editor who can step in and say, well, sorry, old boy, but we're just not going to do that. That's not in our commercial interest. We would probably have to get it past a board of directors if they are taking that kind of intense interest. And we know people like Murdoch have done that in the past. And, you do risk alienating the readers who are thinking, well, as long as you were agnostic and you had each side in there, I was happy to buy it, but I'm not prepared now to support the paper if you're actually arguing for independence. I mean, I know there's this debate where everybody says, well, if people who are, say, businessmen are scared to come out and say yes because they get intimidation. Well, I'm not quite sure who from. I can't imagine, for example, Fergus Ewing being particularly intimidating, but there we are. But that's what they say. But I know stories from people who are on the yes side who are in business who have equally suffered, as in, I won't do business with you. I will cancel my order. I will cancel my reservation. And I mean, you've got to be careful with this because there are deep emotions involved in our campaign, much as I love it, and you do too, Michael. There are people out there, I mean, you get reactions sometimes. I get people saying to me, so what, you believe in independence? And their horror, their exasperation, their horror, and the kind of recoil from you as if you're some type of extremist. There's a lot of that type of opinion still out in Scotland, and perhaps not, engaging directly in the debate in the way that we are, but people have gut instincts to things, and newspapers are quite canny. Newspapers are quite clever at capturing the sort of zeitgeist. They sniff the air. If there was a majority of people clearly running, a majority in the opinion polls for independence, you'd have a different tone coming out of the Scottish media because they would be onto that and think, well, hey, we've got to change. Remember, a lot of these papers didn't back devolution. And they gradually came on side for that. And then when we got devolution, of course, hey, it's the greatest thing going, and it's it's stories and it's business, and they like it. And the same could well be the case for independence. But I also think that you need to be careful here because there are still over 9 months to go. And I think in terms of newspapers supporting the independence cause, watch this space.
Interesting. But then, just to come with a specific example, I don't know if you caught this week, but the Daily Record, the Herald, and the Scotsman more or less printed exactly the same story verbatim, which was more or less a better together press release with a couple of minor changes. I mean, the standard excuse that's given for that kind of behaviour among media is, well, the newsrooms have been gutted of their staff after Rupert Murdoch and everything. The money given to the investigative side means that journalists don't have time to create proper stories, and it takes time and money. But I mean, even given those kind of situations, if we take that as a fact, do you think there's any kind of excuse for that?
Well, you've probably given some excuses there yourself as to why, any organisation will probably find it easier in some ways nowadays to place stuff in a newspaper if it stands up as a story, if it's a decent story, because the fact is that so few reporters are actually out and about nowadays. I mean, it's all done on screen, and something comes into the inbox. It's easy. It's acceptably written. It's got a storyline. I mean, what's not to like is that one of the reasons why that happens. And there's no question that we are now the newspapers and the BBC are actually short-staffed, and that's where quality suffers. However, I think there's a deeper point behind the question you put there, Michael, and it's this: why isn't that press release coming from the yes side? One of the things about Better Together, it gets slagged. I think Better Together are actually doing a good job in their terms. I said the day after the SNP's majority was confirmed, what will happen now is the unionists will just start asking questions. That is the strategy. I mean, the more assertions that come from the British government, I think the sillier they look. I don't think those reports really help much at all. I think for the undecideds, the real key is what Blair McDougall and his chums there are doing, which is simply to ask the questions. Because in lots of these areas, there is no definitive answer. We've just seen this on the EU. I mean, it's very, very difficult to pin it down and to get an answer that people say, oh, now I understand. So I think they've been doing a good job on that front. And the other thing they're good at is coming up with a storyline and shoving it out to the media. And I am very respectful of the Yes campaign. And I'm a friend of an acquaintance of Blair, the other Blair Jenkins. But I think they're not feeding the media monster. They are not producing stories day in, day